How come sometimes we can't draw? Let's face it, sometimes we feel like we don't need to learn art theory or techniques. We feel pretty good at what we do. We feel it coming to us naturally. And we actually wonder, what are all these things for? But then, sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes we just can't draw. Sometimes we are even afraid to draw. And so, we just don't. And believe me, I behaved like that for years. Then how do pro artists work by schedule? Do we have some kind of superpower that makes us always ready to draw? Short answer is no. We all have bad art days. But pro artists that have to work by schedule have to learn how to draw even in those days when we feel like we can't draw. And how do we learn that? Through boring art theory and those useless techniques. And today we are going to talk about composition. Hi, my name is Veronica, aka Vespertiliu. I am a comic book author, tarot and oracle deck creator, and at this point I think you can kind of consider me your spooky art teacher.
It's me again, yours truly.
With this video I don't want to just talk about composition. With this video, I don't want to just talk about composition, but I also want to show you how useful it can be to defeat the blank page syndrome. For those unfamiliar with this term, blank page syndrome is when you stare at the page and have no idea where to start. It is often linked to the writer's block, but it's actually very common in every artistic field. It's usually associated with burnout and art block. But maybe most commonly you could have encountered it every time you had to start a new sketchbook. There is what is called first page fear. The fear of messing up the first page of a sketchbook and therefore feel like you ruined it all. So today we are going to learn about basic composition and how to use it in order to get out of those uncomfortable feelings and actually be able to draw even in those days where we really don't know where to start. We're going to break this video into a few chapters. So first, we're going to have a little introduction to composition in art. Second, we're going to start seeing some basic composition techniques. Third, I'm going to share more composition rules, focusing on the ones I personally use. Fourth, I'm going to give you a quick sketchbook tour, focusing on how to find the composition in an artwork. And finally, I'm going to give you some exercises to just start practicing composition yourself while defeating the blank page. So briefly, what do we mean with composition? In visual art, composition refers to the criteria we can use to arrange elements of an image in order to make it functional. In fact, the kind of composition we choose to develop can also influence the function we want for the image we are creating. Such functions can vary from an image for marketing or one to use as decor, or even an image we want to provoke happiness in the viewer, or one we want to look eerie and provoke feelings of fear. Many times composition can be developed through guidelines. Said guidelines are planned according to which criteria those disposition of lines belong to. For example, dividing a surface in 9 equal parts with 4 crossing lines corresponds to the rule of thirds, as well as simply dividing a surface in half, both vertically and horizontally, can be used both for symmetrical and asymmetrical compositions. So, according to which composition rule you want to apply, you will use a certain disposition of elements and certain factors. Lines are not the only thing one can use to plan the composition of an image. In fact, there are many other things we can consider when creating the composition for an artwork. Values refer to the balancing of lights and shadows in order to emphasize, unite, or divide certain elements of an image. Similar results can be developed through texture. Shapes are also used to define areas of focus and also to develop spaces. That refers to the space taken up by elements, which we call positive space, or the space between, which we call negative space. Colors are also very important in composition, but that requires an entire lesson in color theory. Since my current artworks are mostly, if not entirely, black and white ones, I can be more helpful focusing on aspects we can control even in absence of color. I also believe we have to start from compositions we can develop with simpler, fewer elements in order to start getting used to it. And I personally obtain the most from composition rules, from guidelines. So let's start with some of the most famous composition techniques that you can start using to defeat the blank page and start drawing. One thing to keep in mind is that composition may seem limiting, may seem like a set of rules you have to follow, but the truth is that for a single rule, there are many applications. So I encourage you to do your own research and find what suits your art the most. With that said, let's start with the rule of thirds. As said before, is built by tracing 2 vertical lines and 2 horizontal lines on a surface in order to divide it in 9 equal parts. Once we have created our grid, the criteria we use consists in using the lines, the space between them, and the focal points that are created by the intersection of the 4 lines. By respecting the disposition by thirds, we are able to create balanced images, making us able to develop harmonious compositions. The triangle. The triangle has been used in visual arts for centuries. The use of shapes not only can be used to define areas of focus, but also allows us to guide the eye of the viewer through each side of the shape we used, to give focus to different points of the composition and create movement into the observation of the artwork we are creating. The triangle in particular can help us create multiple effects. When one corner is facing upwards, then we can give the impression of stability. The position of the corners can also be used to define areas of focus instead of just building the focus inside the shape, which is still a correct way to use this kind of composition. The possibilities are many. The golden spiral or the Fibonacci spiral. Quoting from Wikipedia, in geometry, a golden spiral is a logarithmic spiral whose growth factor is pi, the golden ratio. Golden spiral gets wider or farther from its origin by a factor of pi for every quarter turn it makes. The golden ratio, also known as the golden number, golden proportion, or the divine proportion, is a ratio between 2 numbers that equals approximately 1.618. It is strongly associated with the Fibonacci sequence. It is visually represented as a spiral. There are in fact few variations to the golden spiral, such as the Fibonacci spiral. A Fibonacci spiral starts with a rectangle divided into 2 equal squares. In each step, a square the length of the rectangle's longest side is added to form a bigger rectangle. One extraordinary thing about the golden ratio and the golden spiral is that you can actually find it in nature. Such characteristic has made us humans investigate the golden spiral and the golden ratio for centuries. And maybe it is also the reason why it is so heavily considered and used in art. Its link to nature and her ability to balance herself makes it perfect for us to compose our own reality on canvas or on whatever surface you prefer. I'm now going to talk about more composition techniques, focusing on the ones I actually personally use regularly. Let's start with the midpoints. The midpoints grid is created by dividing equally a surface both vertically and horizontally using 2 lines. For as simple as it is, it's pretty valid, and is actually the one I use most regularly. Every time I have to start a more elaborated artwork, I always start by creating my midpoints grid. In my midpoints grid, I usually also include the diagonals. The diagonals are also a very useful composition tool. You can find diagonals in a lot of artworks, frames from movies and photography. I usually add diagonals to my midpoints grid just to have extra guidelines to plan the composition of my artworks. Another element I sometimes add to the grid I create is the circle. As we said before, the use of shapes not only can be used to define areas of focus, but also allows us to guide the eye of the viewer around it and create movement. To be honest, I usually use the circle in particular to define an area of interest in a more decorative way rather than in a functional way. But as for all the shapes, you can use it in many ways. Fun fact! For the sake of this video, I tried to trace the guidelines of the composition we said before onto my artworks. And surprisingly, they actually were often pretty close to perfectly match, even though I haven't used that particular composition rule for that specific artwork. And one thing I noticed is that my art is full of triangles. I'm struggling with my cats today. So, let's have a quick sketchbook tour. I have scans of my original artworks on my tablet so that I can show you all the composition grids above them. Here it is. This is the mirror piece and the Make Them Dance piece. And right here, this is the grid I usually follow, so it's the midpoints and the diagonals, but you can actually trace multiple triangles on this one piece, and here it also follows a triangle shape, so that's pretty cool in my opinion. In this one I use the midpoints plus diagonal grid, but here too I can find a couple triangles in fact, and I also checked and it kind of follows the rule of thirds too. Here too, as usual, I use the midpoint grid with the diagonals, but here too I found this triangle and I'm pretty sure, yes, there is another one here too. As you can see, I always follow my usual grid. It's like my go-to grid for every time I have to do a more elaborated artwork. In this composition, I actually use all the elements I told you before. So there's the midpoint grid, the diagonals, and here behind them there is also the circle, and there's also a big triangle right here. I think this is also sort of like a triangular shape. That's again very interesting. Here I used pretty heavily the diagonals, heavily over this diagonal right here. What I mean with I follow the midpoint grids is, for example, here is one shoulder and here is an elbow. My character is basically at the center of the piece. Then, as I said, we have the diagonal. Also, this shoulder right here follows this diagonal right here, and this arm breaks in this point, touching this diagonal right here. This portion of the artwork is heavily on this half, while this other part is in the other half. Once again, my usual grid, I focused this part of the drawing in the lower half. I also added the circle, as I said. Here are also some triangles. Here is another triangle. Here is another one. Ooh. Yeah, this to say that there are ways in your practice and in your study in which you can analyze what composition is used in a certain artwork, and try get the inspiration from that to try create an artwork with the same composition technique. So now let's see how you can use composition in order to draw even when you feel like you can't draw. I'm now going to give you an exercise a day for a week. Since it's not an easy quick challenge, you can totally spread it out over multiple weeks. My cat is eating. There is no rush, it's up to you. But I suggest you try doing these little exercises, especially on those days when you feel like you can't draw. So, a day before starting with this little challenge, I want you to sit down and scroll on Google or on Pinterest and just save all the images that inspire you. Could be literally anything. If you want, you can even take pictures from books. Take pictures of something pretty or aesthetic you find around. Could be a cute shop, a statue, or even food. For the sake of getting used to the use of composition rules, during this challenge, we won't look for perfection, nor for deep, meaningful results. Remember, we are practicing. And the main goal of these exercises is just to defeat the blank page, giving ourselves the ingredients for our drawing, so the elements of it plus the way to arrange them onto paper. We want to put ourselves in the condition of knowing exactly where to start. So we start by drawing our grid, and then we start positioning our elements according to the areas of focus we want for our image. Again, it doesn't have to be meaningful at all, and we are not looking for perfection. Our goal is to make us able to jump back into work without falling into the void of not knowing where to start. Every day, I want you to choose from 3 up to 7 elements to arrange on a composition using the rule of the day. So, on day 1, rule of thirds. Start by defining the area in which you want to draw. Divide by 3 both the length and the height and mark those points. Connect the points with 4 lines, and here's your grid for the rule of thirds. Day 2. The triangle. After defining your area of action, draw a triangle facing any direction you prefer. If you don't know how to do it, you can draw a horizontal line, measure and mark the midpoint, trace a vertical line from it, and connect the base to the other side of that line, tracing the sides of the triangle. Day 3. The spiral. You can proceed in few ways. You either print it out, try to draw it freehand, or you can build the Fibonacci spiral. So, you start with a little rectangle divided into 2 equal squares. The next step is drawing a square the same length of that rectangle. Then we start adding new squares, and each square has to have the sides measured like the length of the rectangle created before. So, like this. Day 4. Midpoints plus diagonals. Define your area of action and measure the 4 midpoints. Connect them with 1 vertical line and 1 horizontal line, and then connect the 4 corners of the area with 2 diagonals. Day 5. The circle. If you want, you can rebuild the grid from day 4 and then decide where to put your circle accordingly. If you don't have a compass, you can simply trace a circle with a glass or a cup. Day 6 is research. As said before, there are a lot more rules and techniques we can apply in our compositions. On day 6, I want you to look for more of these rules and techniques. And you can do it through books or through internet, even looking for more YouTube videos on this subject. When you find one technique that interests you, I want you to try follow it in your daily artwork. And day 7, of course, is rest. And with that, great job! You started learning composition. Do not get discouraged if you feel like your results are not satisfying to you. For even professional artists, learn new things about composition with each new art piece they produce. For to be an artist is to be an eternal student. Enjoy the process. Thank you so much for watching this video. Also, thank you from the bottom of my heart for the incredible support you showed me in the past weeks. I'm beyond happy for that. If you have any suggestions or requests for future video, feel free to write them in a comment below. I will see you very soon with more art tips. In the meantime, let's make art. Bye!